Good afternoon. As you may remember, my initial research into the Greek magical papyri left me with questions regarding the relationship between the papyri written in Greek and those written in Demotic. I had thought to incorporate the various drawings and figures found throughout the papyri into my research on these topics, but as I started to dig deeper, I realized that the figures were a topic worthy of study in and of themselves. There is relatively little scholarship dedicated only to the drawings of the Greek magical papyri, especially when considered in comparison to the vast amount of research done about their material and text. Progressing through my research, I was pleasantly surprised to find numerous examples of the syncretism of Greek and Egyptian religions in the drawings themselves, which will help guide our understanding of the images. Today I will be focusing on 4 types of figures found repeatedly throughout the papyri in order to determine their purpose and their contribution to the rituals. In an effort to comprehend what function the drawings would have had in the various rites and rituals of the magical papyri, it was important to first understand the role that these papyri would have played in Egyptian culture and who would have used them. They are filled with magical spells, which differ widely in content and nature. There are spells for healing and charms for inducing sickness. There are spells for separation and others for attraction. Some are to be recited, while others include instructions on how to create a physical manifestation of the spell, such as a diffictionis or an amulet. A casual glimpse of the papyri might give the impression that they could be used by an average person as a sort of user's guide to the practice of magic, since many of the spells have the words to be spoken and the ingredients to be used completely written out. But the nature of Egyptian religion, together with a closer look at the papyri themselves, shows that these spells were intended for use by priests or magicians, not the average layman. In the Egyptian culture, religion, magic, and medicine were all considered to be part of the same field. In fact, the Egyptians did not consider the concepts of magic and religion as something separate. Whether it was a funerary service, a wound that needed bandaging, or a curse laid upon a thief, each practice involved spells, specific materials, and most importantly, a ritual. The nature of the rituals in the Greek magical papyri suggests that they were to be performed by a person who was experienced in the practice of magic. The creation of complex figurines and amulets, as you can see here, and the ingredients required, such as expensive herbs and spices like frankincense and myrrh, or even body parts, suggest that these rituals were not to be carried out by just anyone. The language of the text itself also helps support this idea. This collection of papyri contains some that are written entirely in Greek, and some that are written in a combination of both Greek and Demotic, using a cipher for the Egyptian language. Literacy in ancient Egypt was very limited, and the priests were some of the few that could read and write. As there were libraries in the temples, it follows that the priests created and stored documents for their own use, and the presence of both Greek and Demotic in the papyri, and more importantly the ciphers, which were primarily used in Egyptian religious circles, suggests that it was an Egyptian priests writing these scrolls for their own internal use, as they could easily have been used by an Egyptian, but would have seemed encoded to a Greek. The texts of the spells themselves indicate that these were working documents, undergoing revision on the part of the priests. There were multiple versions of similar spells, and some include the author's personal opinion on which is more effective. This could indicate that there was no intention for these papyri to be displayed or used as an object of worship by the people. They were for the priests to consult, use, and refine as necessary in order to continue their practice. While the Greek magical papyri do not contain hieroglyphics themselves, the power that the image or the drawing or the figure had throughout the history of Egyptian religion is an important factor to consider when studying the drawings and figures found throughout the Greek magical papyri. In fact, this is a beautiful example of hieroglyphic papyri taken from the Book of the Dead to give you an idea of how pictorial the earlier Egyptian religious texts were. The Egyptian word for their system of pictorial writing was Medu Netjer, which translated to words of God. The priests were able to communicate with their gods through the reading and writing of this script, as the text itself became a sacred object. The Hellenistic influence spread throughout the Mediterranean at the height of the Roman Empire is evident in the Greek magical papyri, as these religious documents, meant to be used by Egyptian priests, were mainly written in the Greek language. and while we see elements of the Greek religion absorbed into the magical rites, it is important to note that the Egyptian priests have maintained the practice of creating written sacred documents to record their rituals and maintain their connection to their gods, a practice which was not common in ancient Greek religion. Writing was crucial to their practice, even if it was no longer the pictorial script associated with the language of the gods. We will see that the drawings and figures we find throughout these papyri can be considered super hieroglyphs, acting as an extension or an amplification of the magical power of the text itself, infusing the documents or items on which they are inscribed with this power. Among the various drawings in the papyri, 4 groups of figures can be identified. There are those which are a part of the instructions for the ritual. There are characters or magical symbols like the one that we saw on the Difixiones. Images which set the magic in motion, or one could say they depict the outcome of the spell. And finally, carmina figurata, which are a series of letters, sometimes spelling out a palindrome, written in a certain pattern to form a shape. Let's take a closer look at each image. For most, I have included the renderings of each drawing as they appear in the latest version of the translation of the Greek magical papyri by Hans Dieter Betz, in order to give us a clearer understanding of what is depicted. The first type of figure can be referred to as illustrations of the instructions. Papyrus 12 is one of the papyri written in the Demotic script, and we can see here that it contains 2 examples of this type of drawing. This human figure, with a donkey head holding 2 staffs, is included in a spell to cause separation. The spell includes a Demotic incantation, which includes the words written besides the figure, Gerbirth, Bokoseth, and Osiro. While the papyrus is damaged and the instructions are not complete, we are able to understand. You bring a sherd which is burnt, and you write on it a donkey in this manner. A sherd is a broken piece of ceramic, which was a common material used in Egyptian rituals. The instructions continue with another phrase to be spoken, and here NN stands for the names of the people involved. Separate NN, born of NN, from NN, born of NN. And you say this name to it again 7 times, and you lift the sherd, and you perform some action in the house in which they are. The god Seth was often depicted as a male figure with an animal head, and was associated with a donkey. He is considered an evil god, as he creates chaos by inspiring hostility. As such, it is apt that he is the main god invoked in this spell. While we do not know every detail of the ritual, it is clear that the drawing is included in the papyri as part of the instructions, so that the priest carrying out the ritual knows exactly how to draw the required figure. The same is true for the other drawing found on the same papyrus. This figure accompanies a spell for attraction, and thanks to the fragments of text that are still able to be read, we know that this drawing depicts a mummy on a lion bed, and the figure of Anubis standing over it. The drawing was to be inscribed on a fresh piece of papyrus along with the spell as part of the ritual. This image is a great example of the syncretism between the Greek and Egyptian cultures and religions. In Egyptian tradition, Anubis is the god of embalming and the mummification process. Due to the Greco-Roman influence, he takes on a new role and is considered a sort of cosmic deity ruling over the world. He brings light to the world and produces love potions in order to promote the population of the lands. In the papyrus here, Anubis is portrayed in his traditional Egyptian capacity as the god of embalming, but this image accompanies a spell for attraction, which would call upon Anubis's power for love charms, as understood in the Greek tradition. The characters, or magical symbols, are the second type of figure found in the Greek magical papyri. They often accompany instructions for creating an amulet or charm, such as here in Papyrus 10. The instructions say, take a gold or silver lamella and engrave on it the characters and names, and when you have consecrated it, wear it in purity. Now here it is. In these types of spells, the object itself then seems to be infused with the power necessary to bring about the desired effect. Here, the charm will restrain the anger of one's enemies, as well as ward off phobias and nightmares. As you can see, the characters are generally composed of straight lines with circles at the ends, and while they tend to share characteristics among themselves, the figures are not related to any alphabet and do not appear to act as a cipher. Instead, they seem to act as a sort of sacred script, in theory only available to the priests and the gods. The fact that the priest made sure to include a diagram showing which magical characters should be written on the lamella shows that the symbols indicated were specifically chosen for this ritual. This divine symbolic writing system recalls the hieroglyphic script's use of figures, and just as the hieroglyphic texts were considered sacred objects, the amulets or charms on which the magical characters were inscribed were infused with the power invoked from the gods. The third type of drawing is one that seems to set the desired effects of the spell into motion. The difference between these figures found in Papyrus 39 with those in the first category, those that illustrate the instructions, is that these depict the action required from the god. Instead of the static figure of Seth we saw invoked earlier, here we see the god Bes on the left and another figure unidentified on the right, holding a severed head. This is another fine example of syncretism, as the god Bes developed an association with the erotic during the Greco-Roman period, so it is fitting to find him involved with a love spell. The incantation of the spell is as follows. I adjure you by the 12 elements of heaven and the 24 elements of the world that you attract Heracles, whom Typus bore, to me, to Alus, whom Alexandria bore, immediately, immediately, quickly, quickly. While it may seem odd that a spell for attraction or love would include the severed head of this Heracles, perhaps, this type of imagery is commonly used with the malign spells found throughout the papyri, and forcing love could very well have been considered a sort of evil magic. Important to note here is that there are no instructions for this image to be drawn on any object or transferred in any way outside of the papyri. It seems that the image was meant to be seen only by the priest while he performed the required ritual. This image leads us to the last category of images, as it includes these triangular shapes formed by letters we can see on either side of the drawing of Bes. These shapes are referred to as the carmina figurata. These figures are created by rows of letters, with each line either gaining or losing a letter or shifting from side to side so that they eventually form a shape. They can vary between several geometric forms such as the triangle, rhombus, or rectangle. As you can see from the rendering of the Carminum Figuratum found in Papyrus 19, it is much more complex than the two triangles we saw in the previous figure. Again, there are no instructions for this particular figuratum to be transcribed onto any separate document. This intricate geometric form was included in this love spell solely for the priest to see, and therefore must have been an important factor to the rite. Perhaps he chanted the words aloud, but undoubtedly the visual impact of these figures on the page was an integral aspect of the spell. While this figure was not intended to be written on another piece of material, this is not true for all of the Carmina Figurata. Some are also included in instructional texts, and are to be incised on another piece of papyrus, fabric, or ceramic. Here we can see a set of figures, including two Carmina Figurata, which were to be written out and used in a spell to catch a thief. These Carmina Figurata differ from others in that they feature the 5 vowels and the letter Y. This is another example of syncretism, incorporating the Greek idea of vowels as powerful stoicheia, or symbols of the cosmic forces, into the ritual. Whether on an amulet or charm, or in the papyri directly, these figures' visual representations carried weight and transmitted a type of power to the document on which they were written. The Egyptian priests would have felt this weight, this power, through all of the 4 types of drawings or figures identified in the Greek magical papyri. The picture or drawing was once the way that the Egyptians conceived of speaking with their gods. As the religious documents shifted to featuring non-pictorial languages, it is conceivable that the priests sought to keep the connection to the Medu Neter, the words of God, by including drawings on their religious documents. As we have seen, the images and the magical characters incised on other objects to make amulets or gems were meant to infuse those objects with the power invoked by the magical spell. We can therefore hypothesize that the priests would have intended that those images inscribed solely in the papyri, for example, the more intricate Carminum Figuratum, or those meant to set the magic in motion, infuse the papyri themselves and consequently the priest performing the spells with their power. Acting as superhieroglyphs, the images act as a connection between the papyri themselves, the magical power called upon from the gods, and the priests performing the rituals. Thank you.